Okay, so this lecture is on scoping for procedures, whether you want static or dynamic scoping. Now, you're used to static scoping, also called lexical scoping, in every language that you use. There's very few languages that use dynamic scoping. Emacs Lisp, he mentions in the book, older dialects of Lisp. I think that perhaps it's possible that Perl accidentally had dynamic scoping in like its first implementation, but that it was removed or made optional. So anyway, the idea with dynamic scoping is that when you see a call, you just use the environment that's in place at the point of the call. And so if we look at that program that he gives that kind of has the examples, so this is an example program here, and he declares P and he declares Q, and then he redeclares P. So when he calls Q down here, Q says, oh, what's my body call P? And if you just use the environment that's currently in scope, you're going to use this P, which is a bit difficult for modern programmers to understand. So let's go back up and look. But here's how you implement it. And the thing is that it's kind of actually easier to implement usually dynamic scoping, but it is just kind of a mistake. I should mention maybe here this little comment that I have that having procedures without parameters seems odd, but we'll add them in the next section that we cover in the book. So in the homework, you got I gave you an implementation of the what he calls fully dynamic scoping rules, and you need to implement the static rules. So I should really have said here, here are the rules, these are the dynamic ones. So what did our rules differ a little bit from Huddle's because we have a single environment which keeps the variable map and the procedure map stored inside of one package, and he can manipulate them individually. But as you start to add more things to the language, more kinds of abstractions, it gets really tiresome to sort of keep adding a new kind of environment. But you have finer control in the rules, as you can see here, because when he sees a procedure declaration, the result is a procedure environment. For us, when we see a procedure declaration, we have to return both an environment and a store. So we return one of these and a store. And that's because the variable declaration can modify the store. And decals is a type that has both procedure and variable declarations in it. It just allows us to intermix variable and procedure declarations in any order. But that means to process a declaration, we have kind of two cases. Now, if you look at his var rules in the book, you'll see he returns this. And the reason that ours returns two things, the environment and the store, is because the var rule updates both the environment store and the proc does not. So we can see that kind of here that to evaluate this in this store, it doesn't change it, because what we do is we just evaluate what's remaining, the decals, the rest of the list of declarations, in an environment that binds P to its body, which is S right here. And we use the same store. So that shows that the store doesn't get modified here, and he doesn't modify it. So we do exactly the same thing. I mean, his is process the rest of the procedure declarations up there in the environment that's updated so that P, the name of the procedure, gets bound to S in the environment, ENVP environment store. And so that's the one that comes back. So our rules are almost identical. It's just that he has two separate environments, one from string to loc and one from string to statement, and we just put them in var and proc. We have our string to loc map and our string to statement map. So he's able to pick and choose which environment. Now, one thing to remember is that when we say in our role, env is the new environment where P is updated to S, that's really the environment env, which is the one that contains both of them, with the proc part updated, and this is the proc part of the current environment updated so that P is bound to S in the map. This, I guess, maybe up here is just a little bit of a lie. This should really be env is a var field which has type map string to loc, and proc is a type map string to statement. And this is what you're going to have to modify when you do the homework. You're going to have to say, okay, what it maps string to what? Oh, statements and environments. So I guess the point I was making here is that, this is mathematical notation that represents this bit of code. And just to remind you that this insert is a function that takes an A and takes a B and takes a map from A to B and returns a new one where this pair is in there. A is a string, in our case, up here for the environment for proc, string, statement, and proc env is a map from string to statement. So that's how the insert works.